some really beautiful readings that, when we contemplate, can take us to a whole new level. Thank you, Kristen. So this month we are continuing to explore and more fully understand these things called the principles of freedom. And the understanding, of course, is that freedom is a quality of all life. It's something that we are inherently born with, but yet at the same time, it is something that we must affirm and claim. Not only for ourselves, but for everyone on the planet. And the experience of freedom begins, of course, within us. It cannot be demonstrated in our external expression and world if we are not fully and completely embodying it in consciousness. So what does that mean? That means, as we just heard in those beautiful readings, that we must willing to release, let go of all of the ways in which we hold ourselves back from freedom. And that means the false beliefs that we've accumulated over the years in life and limitation, and the false beliefs, the false or the experiences that we've had that have led to different kinds of mental and emotional woundedness. And because we're free, we're able to do this. We're able to make choices. We have the freedom to choose. So freedom then is the discovery that because of our divine nature, we can release what does not serve us, and we can cultivate our inherent nature, our divine nature, which has been called the kingdom of heaven or heaven on earth. And that state of mind then is the place from which all else is added. So the good that we ultimately desire is dependent on this inner atmosphere of freedom, this ability to choose, to release what does not serve, and to create that vacuum that we just heard about, that space in which the truth of who we are can be revealed and come forth. So it happens that way on the inside as well as the outside. When we release a lot of clutter in our lives, we form a vacuum and allow more good to come in. It's the same way with our own consciousness. We free ourselves from the clutter of all that nonsense, that self-induced nonsense, or that nonsense that has been induced by our experience in this culture. As we free ourselves, we make space, create a void through which the divine may shine through. And it goes back to the essence of our teaching, which Ernest Holmes put so beautifully. Change your thinking, change your life. It actually means change your consciousness, your belief structure, change your life. So I remember the feeling that I had many years ago when I first came into this teaching. I remember walking into my very first Science of Mind spiritual community and hearing this message about the wholeness, the completeness, and the perfection of my being as divine, original blessing instead of original sin. And that this is not only the truth of me, but of all people. It was so freeing. It was so freeing. And I, over time, as I started practicing the principles that I learned in this teaching, I began to experience inner healing, and I began to release all of the woundedness that I had accumulated over the years. And it's still a thing of continued progress. We're on this evolutionary path, so there's always more that we can reveal and unveil. And yet those early days, those early years in this teaching were so extraordinarily freeing for me. And I've heard many who have come into this teaching who have either heard it for the first time or began practicing it say the same thing, And the term that I've heard is, I feel like I have come home, or I'm home, is is um, is the sentiment that I've heard. And again, it's because what are we coming home to? Yes, a beloved spiritual community that believes things that are uplifting and supportive, but it's also about this teaching that supports us in making that divine connection, that direct connection with the divine within, which is one and unified with the all that is presence of God. So this spiritual teaching then is a path of freedom. It's a walk on the path of freedom. And it is therefore a walk on the path of opening our hearts. And so the thing about this teaching is it is too good to keep for ourselves. It's too good to keep for ourselves. In fact, we are able to experience more liberation, more freedom when we share it with others. So today is about this idea of the law of circulation that was so beautifully expressed in those quotes that Kristen read. This law of circulation is a law that if we don't align with it, we experience consequences. And when we do align with it, we experience freer, fuller, more expanded expression of who we are. So I have a powerful illustration that I'd like to share with you. And it's found in the two seas that are located in Palestine. Both seas are fed by the River Jordan. One sea is fresh, it's stocked with fish, it has greenery all around it. The trees put their roots into this beautiful river and receive healing and growing sustenance. It's surrounded by children playing and homes, and it is a place of prosperity. That same river flows into another sea. And this particular sea lays south of the other sea. It has no fish, no songs of birds, no children's laughter, and the air hangs heavy over it. And the water itself cannot be safely imbibed by anyone, any man, woman, child, or creature, without becoming sick. So there's the same river, the River Jordan, that flows into both seas. So what's the difference? What's the difference? And this is the crux of what we're talking about today. The first sea, which is the Sea of Galilee, which is rich in life and life-giving and healing. The water flows in and the water flows out. It gives of itself. The other sea, every drop of water that flows into it stays. It does not give. And so one sea, the Sea of Galilee, that's the one that's rich and full of life. The other sea, the Dead Sea. And so in truth, that's what happens when we don't give of ourselves, share our teachings, model our teachings with other people. This beautiful teaching of who we are in truth, whole, perfect, complete, beautiful beings of light, full of infinite potential and possibility. That is so freeing to know that. That I would love to see everybody on the planet come to that realization. Can you imagine how different our planet would be if everybody knew that? So that brings me to the topic of humility, because I think this is really important. In the traditional idea of humility, I'd like to give you an illustration. There were 3 religious leaders who were standing at the altar and beating their chests. And in so-called great humility, completely and totally actually talking about how they are nothing, they are unworthy before God. And I know many of you who've been brought up in traditional religion have heard this. I know I'm used to hear this. Shortly, an acolyte came up and did the same thing, started beating his chest and proclaiming that he was nothing. To which one of the religious leaders elbowed the other one and said, "Do you believe that? Look who thinks that he's nothing." That is not true humility. That's not the humility that we teach in this teaching. And I'm going to talk first about lack of humility, and then I'll go into what true humility is. So what that is all about is self-shaming. When we say, I'm nothing, I'm unworthy, when we call ourselves names, or when we call other people names, or anything followed by the I am or you are that is anything other than the truth of our being, is a shaming kind of process. And what does shaming do? I listened to this beautiful talk by Brene Brown, who does research on these kinds of things. And the conclusion that she came to, that will not surprise you, I'm sure, is that shaming causes stagnation. Stagnation like the Dead Sea. When we shame ourselves, when we call ourselves names or say we're unworthy or not enough or whatever, we stagnate our ability. We actually get in the way of our motivation to do anything about it, because there's this feeling like, oh, well, I just give up. When we do that to others, it's the same thing. It does not motivate. So shaming does the opposite of what we would like to accomplish. And yet, think about our culture. For so many years, our culture has focused on using shame as a motivator. And no wonder we've run into a lot of roadblocks with that way of relating to one another. So what is the opposite then? This is where we get into, let me talk a little bit about what happens when you have a lack of humility. This is how it shows up. People become self-absorbed, often compensating for that poor self-image by bragging about their accomplishments or their status, or showing little to no tolerance for people who don't agree with them. True humility comes from being rooted in our true identity, which I talked about earlier, whole, perfect, complete, individualized expressions of the Most High, made in the likeness and image of God. True humility means, therefore, that we understand that everyone and everything has that same divine origin, that everyone is an amazing, unique, magnificent being. When we practice true humility, then our hearts open. We come from love. And then love is the motivator. We see the perfection of each person that we come across, no matter what presents itself. And therefore we are healing. We are a presence that helps people be freed of the burden of all the false concepts that have been collected over the years. So it's just like the healing seas of Galilee. Spirit flows through us and out into the world. And so how do we get ourselves to this place where we're able to be this beneficial presence? Well, we know woundedness doesn't work, because we've heard that wounded people wound other people. Healed people heal other people. So the healing work that we do within ourselves in this teaching, by taking classes, by doing our spiritual practice, our meditation, our spiritual mind treatment. Spiritual mind treatment, by the way, is a proclamation of truth, a declaration of the truth of our being. That's how it starts out, the nature of God and our truth in that, and as that presence. And therefore, when we create from this expanded place of love. So true humility then is like being like the Sea of Galilee, where we come from an overflow. We've allowed that awareness of who we are to expand us, and then we have this overflow that we're able to give to others. So that is humility. That's a really important first part. That's new thought humility. And the new thought humility is that nobody's better or less than I am. That's a really important piece to it. That we are all amazing beings. So the next piece I wanted to talk about, as we talk about humility, is seeing beyond conditions. So once we've established ourselves in this true humility, this awareness of who everybody is in truth, we're able to see beyond the appearance of who people are and how they present themselves. Here's a great example. It's a story of George Hoyle, who is a Jesuit who works in the Los Angeles area and has done so for 30 years, dismantling the consciousness that contributes to gang activity in youth. His mission is called Homeboy Industries. And so he's directed many hundreds of at-risk youth away from gangs and into productive lives by providing them with employment, tattoo removal, counseling, and love. And often youth who come to him bearing full facial tattoos present themselves in this way, and he is able, this Father Boyle is able to see beyond the appearance of who they are to the divine essence of who they are. This is essential. He's able to do this in order to love them and in order to support them in becoming more of who they are in truth. So he sees only God when he looks at them. He sees only the divine spark. And he works, therefore, successfully to restore their dignity and also inspire them to work with their peers in doing the same kind of work. Looking beyond appearances, looking beyond conditions. This is part of sharing the freedom that we're talking about today. And the final thing I wanted to share with you is the idea of offering emotional support and a new perspective to other people, because you might say, well, how can I do this in my everyday life? I want to start a mission, like Father Boyle did, but I really do want to make a difference. Well, here's a really beautiful example. It's the story of Maya Angelou. I don't know how many of you know this, but she suffered a lot of torment and physical abuse as a child, to the point where she was mute for 5 years. And then a neighbor and a friend began to work with her and listened to, and supported her emotionally, and also introduced her to great literature and inspired authors. So that over time, this informed Maya Angelou's work in the world, which is to be a conduit of love. She's a great poet, and her quotes are all over the place. In fact, I think Michelle carries one of her quotes on her screen, on her computer. And so think about how unfree she was, mute at one point, and yet just simply by being a presence of love, this friend, this neighbor, was able to support her in becoming who she is in truth and to being a healing presence on the planet. So Michelle wanted me to show this to you. I don't know if you can read it, but it says, "A wise woman wishes to be no one's enemy and refuses to be anyone's victim." So that's one of her. That's on Michelle's laptop. So what is it then that we are being called to do? You know, people are suffering on the planet with all the things that are going on. There are a lot of people caught up in a state of anxiety. There are people in prisons, in detention centers. We have our soldiers who are recovering from PTSD, single moms, people in our lives who could benefit from knowing how to connect with this state of heaven within us, this divine connection. So the freedom that we enjoy through this divine connection needs to be shared. Emerson said, "Beware of holding too much good in your hands." And Holmes says, "When the law of circulation is retarded, stagnation results." The Dead Sea. So we can only be like the Sea of Galilee by truly sharing our freedom, helping others experience the same. So what does that mean? What does that look like? It means volunteering. It means smiling at strangers. It means every form of good that we can imagine and sharing with others, and just everyday things, holding a door open, shoveling someone's walk in the winter. You know, just use your imagination. Every single act in this way that comes from a place of love and giving is a way in which we serve, and a way in which we extend the freedom that we have experienced in this teaching with others. So I'd like to just end with this beautiful quote from the Quran. It says, "And whoever saves a life, it is as though he has saved all humankind." Every time we share that love, every time we share our teaching, and someone's heart is freed, we are doing our part in freeing all of mankind. And so it is. So now I would like to introduce to you again our beloved Sharon.
Beautiful talk. Thank you, Kathleen.